September 1957. The most beloved entertainer in America, the man they called Ambassador Satch, is watching the news from Little Rock on a hotel television, and he is at a breaking point. Project Code LA5000. In one explosive interview, Louis Armstrong detonated his image as a silent ambassador of goodwill with one sentence: "The way they are treating my people in the South, the government, can go to hell." Project Code LA5000. This is the story of the day the music stopped being enough. It is the story of a tour canceled, a reputation risked, and a hero forged in the fire of defiance. Project Code LA5000. To understand the shock of that moment, you have to understand who Louis Armstrong was to the American government in the mid-1950s. He was a global icon. Project Code LA5000. He was their secret weapon. A cultural ambassador sent across the globe to prove that American democracy and American race relations were working. Project Code LA5000. The State Department used him to counter Soviet propaganda. They needed his smile to distract from the reality of Jim Crow, and for a long time, he played the part. Project Code LA5000. He was the face of jazz diplomacy, a man whose horn could open doors that were closed to politicians, but the mask was heavy and the cost was hidden. Project Code LA5000. But by 1957, the facade was cracking. 9 black students were being blocked from entering Central High School by the National Guard on the orders of Governor Faubus. Project Code LA5000. America was watching, and Louis Armstrong, sitting in a hotel room in Grand Forks, North Dakota, was watching most closely. He was tired of the silence. Project Code LA5000. He saw the hatred in the eyes of the mob. He saw the betrayal of the government he represented. The ambassador was losing his patience. Project Code LA5000. The phones were ringing in Washington, but the response was silence. Armstrong knew that if he didn't speak now, his silence would be a form of complicity. Project Code LA5000. He was in Grand Forks for a concert. He was staying at the Dakota Hotel, a place that felt a world away from the violence in Arkansas, yet the weight of it followed him. Project Code LA5000. The world didn't expect a revolution to start in North Dakota, but that's exactly where the first shot of the Goodwill Rebellion was fired. Project Code LA5000. Larry Lubenow, a 21-year-old journalism student, managed to get into Armstrong's suite. He was looking for a story on jazz. He found a revolution. Project Code LA5000. Armstrong was already simmering. When Lubenow asked about the crisis in the South, the goodwill ambassador persona vanished. The raw truth took its place. Project Code LA5000. "The way they are treating my people in the South, the government can go to hell," he told the stunned reporter. It was a statement that would reverberate. Project Code LA5000. He called Eisenhower two-faced and said he had no guts. He was challenging the most powerful man in the world, and he didn't care about the consequences. Project Code LA5000. The headlines were already spinning. The State Department's carefully crafted image was about to be shredded in the morning editions across the nation. Project Code LA5000. The news hit the South like a thunderbolt. The man who had been the darling of the airwaves was now, in the eyes of the segregationists, a public enemy. Project Code LA5000. At stake was a high-profile tour of the Soviet Union. The State Department had spent months planning it. Armstrong was to be their ultimate Cold War asset. Project Code LA5000. But Armstrong officially pulled out. "The people over there ask me what's wrong with my country. What am I supposed to say?" He refused to be a pawn. Project Code LA5000. The backlash was swift. In the South, radio stations began dumping his records. DJs organized boycotts. The music that unified the country was now a target. Project Code LA5000. Armstrong's albums were being pulled from the shelves in Mississippi and Alabama. The cost of his words was being measured in lost royalties and silent airwaves. Project code LA5000. "I wouldn't take back a thing I've said," he insisted. "What I've said is me." He was standing his ground, knowing that his career might never be the same. Project code LA5000. The criticism came from all sides. Some saw him as a traitor. Others in the black community had long seen him as an Uncle Tom. He was a man without a country. Project code LA5000. The stage was empty, and the silence was deafening. But Armstrong knew that his voice, once raised, could not be unraised. The stand was final. Project code LA5000. He was waiting for a response, not from his manager, not from his fans, but from the man in the Oval Office who had the power to change history. Project code LA5000. On September 24th, Armstrong sent a telegram to the White House. It was a personal message for President Eisenhower, written from the heart. Project code LA5000. "If you decide to walk into the schools with the little colored kids, take me along, Daddy. God bless you." It was a masterclass in challenging the status quo. Project code LA5000. The message was received. Whether it was the shame of the world's greatest artist or the pressure of the moment, the president finally had to move. Project code LA5000. The ink was barely dry before the orders were issued. The 101st Airborne was preparing for a mission that would define the era. Project code LA5000. That same day, Eisenhower finally acted. He sent the 101st Airborne to Little Rock. The federal government had finally intervened, and the world was watching. Project code LA5000. The tanks and the troops on the streets of Arkansas were a stark admission. The time for goodwill had passed. The time for enforcement had begun. Project code LA5000. Historians believe Armstrong's public explosion helped shame the president into action. The most famous man in the world had made it impossible to ignore. Project code LA5000. Every screen in America was now a witness to the crisis, and Armstrong's voice, though not on the broadcast, was the soundtrack to the change. Project code LA5000. After the troops arrived, Armstrong's tone shifted. He called Eisenhower the greatest. He wanted to get back to the music, but everything had changed. Project code LA5000. The cost he paid was quiet and deep. The lost gigs, the broken ties in the South. But he never looked back. He knew he had done what was necessary for his soul. Project code LA5000. History eventually caught up with him. The man they once called a traitor is now seen as a hero who used his global platform when it mattered most. Project code LA5000. We often remember the music, but we forget the man. Louis Armstrong's stand in 1957 was a turning point for the artist, for the civil rights movement, and for the nation. Project code LA5000. Was Armstrong's stand underrated by history? Tell us what you think in the comments. Subscribe to Louis Armstrong, The Untold Stories for more. Project code LA5000. The backlash wasn't just for Armstrong. Larry Lubenow, the young reporter who got the scoop, was fired by his editor just a week later for breach of instructions. Project code LA5000. During the interview, Armstrong's fury was such that he reportedly sang the Star-Spangled Banner with obscenities until his vocalist, Velma Middleton, tried to stop him. Project code LA5000. But as the dust settled, allies emerged. Jackie Robinson, Lena Horne, and Nat King Cole rallied to his side, praising his courage to blow his top over injustice. Project code LA5000. He would eventually return to his role as a jazz ambassador, notably in his 1960 tour of Africa. But he was no longer a silent partner for the State Department. Project code LA5000. He had proven that his title wasn't just a branding tool, but a platform for moral agency. He had forced the domestic civil rights issue onto the global stage. Project Code, LA5000. This is the untold story of a man who loved his country enough to tell it when it was wrong. A man who refused to smile while his soul was in pain. Project Code, LA5000. The stand didn't go unnoticed by the FBI. A file was opened, and Armstrong was monitored for years. The government he shamed never truly forgot his defiance. Project Code, LA5000. By the 1958 Newport Jazz Festival, the world had begun to forgive him. But the image of the submissive entertainer was gone forever, replaced by a man of conviction. Project Code, LA5000. Louis Armstrong's 1957 stand remains one of the most significant acts of political protest in the history of American music. He showed us that the horn is just a tool. Project Code, LA5000. The real music was his voice, speaking up when no one else would. He was a hero to history, even when he was a traitor to the status quo. Project Code, LA5000. The news didn't stop at the Atlantic. Headlines in Paris and Berlin blared the story. Ambassador Satch tells Ike, "Go to hell." The world was stunned by his bravery. Project Code, LA5000. In the cafes of Paris, the talk wasn't about jazz that week. It was about the American superstar who had finally spoken the truth that the world already knew. Project Code, LA5000. In London, British officials worried about the fallout. If America's greatest cultural export was turning against its own government, what did that mean for the Cold War? Project Code, LA5000. The echoes reached the United Nations. Armstrong had done more for civil rights in one night than years of diplomacy. He had made the American dream look like a nightmare. Project Code, LA5000. In his later years, that famous smile remained. But for those who knew the story of 1957, there was a new depth in his eyes. He was a man who had found his soul. Project Code, LA5000. This has been a production of Louis Armstrong, The Untold Stories. Join us for more deep dives into the music and the man. Project Code, LA5000.